guys, and we're back in the kitchen, and it's Sunday, first Sunday of lockdown number 2, and all week long I've been having a real craving for some red meat. So today we're going to make some red meat comfort food. It's not exactly beef bourguignon, and it's not exactly a stew. It's kind of like a hybrid of the two. If they had a baby, this is kind of what it would be. So you can see I've got my old workhorse Dutch oven out here ready to go. And now I'll show you the very long list of ingredients, and don't be afraid of the long list of ingredients because it's really worth it in the end. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so first things first, we've got our stew meat, and it's cut into about 1.5 or 2-inch pieces. I might actually take it down. Some of those are pretty big. Although we are going to be simmering it and it's going to be falling apart in the end anyway, so it won't really matter. Over here I've got some all-purpose flour, which I have already seasoned with some salt, some pepper, some onion powder, and some garlic powder. That's what we're going to use to dredge our beef in. And this is going in no particular order. So back here we have in this one, oops, right here, we've got some Worcestershire sauce. We've got 2 teaspoons of ground thyme. We have 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 cup of red wine. We've got some extra virgin olive oil. We've got some potatoes that are been washed and scrubbed. I left a little scrubby on the back there to show you. I have one that's sort of dedicated for potatoes, and it does a nice job when you're washing them under running water to just take some of that really tough outer skin off, which is nice. We've got 4 cloves of minced garlic. We've got about 1.5 cups of white button mushrooms that have been sliced in half. I used 4 large carrots, 4 stalks of celery, 1 yellow cooking onion, and 1 sweet Vidalia onion. About 4 strips of bacon that I have sliced up. We've got a teaspoon of white sugar. And over here I've got some beef broth. If you don't have beef broth, you can use the onion soup mix prepared, but be careful with the salt in that because it can be quite salty. And then last but not least, a brown gravy packet. Okay, so let's go back to the stove and get cooking. Okay, so first things first, we've got our Dutch oven over heat here, and I've got a little bit of olive oil in here, and when that is really nice and hot, I'm going to add my bacon in, and I'm going to start rendering that down because we're going to want the fat from that to use when we sear our beef. So I'm going to let that heat up a little bit, set my bacon aside. I'm going to give my all-purpose flour mixture here a little stir to combine those spices in there. And then what I'm going to do, a separate plate here, I'm just going to dredge each piece of meat and set it aside. So to show you, this is kind of what your meat ends up looking like when you dredge it in the flour. It doesn't have to be real thick covering, but. And I'm just using the beef right out of the package. There's enough natural moisture on the beef. You don't have to run it under the tap to get it wet or anything of that nature. Okay, now we're getting some good sizzle in here, so in goes the rest of our bacon. There's our meat all dredged. Bacon crisping up nice. Here's another look at our meat, dredged in our flour mixture. And look at our bacon rendering down nicely. And we're going to cook it till it's like, crispy. Okay, so we've got our bacon getting some nice crispiness on it, so I'm going to take it out of the pot. I've cut the heat back so that it's medium-high. You don't want this to start smoking and set your fire alarm off. At least that's what happens here. My fire alarm is pretty sensitive. Okay. And don't worry about all the brown bits if you have them on the bottom. That's great, actually. We're going to deglaze the pan a little bit later, and those will all come up and just add to the flavor. So there's our bacon. We will set that aside, and we're going to get our beef in here. And you're going to sear it a couple minutes on each side. And you want to put your beef in your pan and leave room. You don't want it touching up against each other. You want to give it lots of space. You want to sear all the sides, a couple minutes each. And you're going to start seeing some coloring on your beef. That's good. What you want. Once all of your sides of your beef have been seared, take them out and set them on a plate. Using the bacon fat in here is something that's more typical with beef bourguignon, but like I said earlier, this is kind of a hybrid beef stew, beef bourguignon. Maybe we should call it beef sturguignon, I don't know. This is a pretty time-consuming dish in terms of prep. A lot of chopping and then searing, and then you're going to simmer it on the stove top for like a good 2.5 hours until it's like falling apart tender. But it's locked down. We got time on our hands. So once you get your beef in the pan and you're searing it, don't move around, don't stir it. You're searing it. Let it sit a couple minutes on each side before you turn it. And you'll see you get some browning, some dark bits. Don't worry about that. That's good. All good. Okay. Beef's all seared. I've taken it out. I've set it on a separate plate. I'm adding my onions. This is starting the process of deglazing the pan and getting all the good bits off the bottom. There, that should be better now. You can add a little butter or oil in here if you want to. I might add a little bit of olive oil. Just a little. And to that we're going to add our garlic. 4 large cloves of garlic. You want to keep stirring constantly here because you don't want your garlic to burn, especially if you're using one of these cast iron Dutch ovens, because boy, they hold the heat like crazy. Okay, and now I'm going to add my cup of red wine. There you go. And I'm going to stir. And that wine's just bubbling and boiling, and that's great. And it's loosening all the brown bits off of the bottom of the Dutch oven, and that's good, because that's where all your flavor is. Okay, so our red wine has probably reduced by about half, which is good, which means we've cooked off the alcohol. So we're going to go back. We're going to take our beef now and put it back into the pan. So what we've got in here is our red wine and our onion and our garlic. And now our beef with all the juices that have collected on the plate. And if there's any flour left there, don't worry about that either. That can go in too. Okay. Now we are going to add our Worcestershire sauce, our thyme, our paprika. We're going to put our bacon back in here. Looking excellent. Everything's well combined. So you can see the onions are starting to get a little translucent. Okay, so now we're going to add our beef broth to this. And we want the meat to basically be covered. Okay, so our beef is just barely covered by the stock. We're going to bring this whole thing up to a boil. We're going to reduce the heat so that it's simmering. We're going to put our lid on, just leaving a little gap so that some of the steam can escape. We're going to reduce the heat down to like a medium-high to a simmer. And now is the point in the program where you crack a good book, or you go do a little laundry or whatever, because you've got about 2.5 hours worth of stovetop simmering here before we add the rest of our veggies. Okay, so this has come up to a rolling boil, as you can see. Whoops, pardon my camera shake here. So I'm cutting the heat back to medium. We're going to get this just so it's simmering, and then I'm going to clap the lid on it, and we're just going to check on it periodically, give it a stir, make sure nothing's sticking on the bottom, and we're going to meet you back in about 2.5 hours. And then right before serving, we're going to mix up some dumplings to go on top, and this is going to be a really good January comfort food meal. Okay, so 2.5 hours of simmering later, and this is what we are left with. You can see the liquid has gone down by half, so we will have to add some more liquid in here when we add our vegetables in order that everything is submerged and able to cook. So now we can add our other veggies, and then we can set about making the mixture for our dumplings. Okay, so in go our veggies, potatoes, our celery, carrots, and I'm going to have to add some more beef stock to this because there is not enough liquid in here now that everything has reduced to cover. And we're going to increase our heat, medium-high heat, because we need to get this liquid boiling so that those potatoes and everything else cook through. I'm going to toss in our mushrooms. And this is where I'm going to add our brown gravy packet. This is going to help with the thickening as well. Sprinkle it in. Now, we're going to bring this up. We want it to come to a boil again so that it cooks our potatoes. Another 20-25 minutes. At that point, we'll be ready to put our dumpling mixture on top, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think for a little bit more color, before I even do that, right before I put the dumpling mixture on, I think I'm going to add maybe a cup or a cup and a half of frozen green peas just for some color. You could add corn or even mixed vegetables if you wanted to, although you've already got carrots and stuff in here. So I will show you how it looks. Looks pretty darn good if you ask me, and it's starting to come to a boil. So we'll just keep an eye on it. The beef is already so tender that you can break it apart with a wooden spoon, so it's perfect. We may need to add a little bit more thickening agent to it before we put the dumplings on top, but let's get our dumpling mixture together next. Okay, time to make some very simple, very basic dumplings. So we have here 1 cup of all-purpose flour, which I'm going to sift into a bowl. Make sure there's no lumps. We've got 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Also going to sift that in. We've got 1 teaspoon of granulated sugar. And we're going to do some salt. About a 1/2 teaspoon, I would say, of kosher salt. To that, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of unsalted butter. Okay, and if you have in your arsenal, in your kitchen, one of these pastry cutters, these old-timey kind of pastry cutters, this is where this comes in really handy. We're just going to work it. We're going to work it until the butter is cut up into and forms kind of rice-size pieces, I guess, with the flour. All right, now I'm going to take a fork, and to this I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of whole milk. We're going to mix our batter, our dumpling batter. It's going to be thick. Sure there's all the dry bits on the sides and bottom of your bowl get incorporated. Okay, nice and thick, perfect. So now our stew, or sturgeon, we still haven't settled on what we're going to call it, beef sturgeon, is still bubbling and brewing on the stove here, looking great, but it needs to cook for a while longer to cook those potatoes and carrots thoroughly. So we're going to let that go. When we are ready to put the dumplings on, we'll come back and we'll make sure it's thick enough before we put the dumplings in, and then we'll finish it all off and we'll see how we did. Okay, so we'll meet you back here shortly. Okay, so it's been about another 20 minutes after we put our carrots and our potatoes in here, and they are cooked perfectly. You can just cut the potatoes and the carrots with a fork. The beef is falling apart, so that's tender, that's good. We put our frozen peas in here, okay, so they are in and they are cooked. Now, in fairness, I did have to add one more packet of brown gravy mix to this because of all the liquid that came off of the veggies and stuff as they were cooking, and the extra liquid that we had added in to make sure that there was enough liquid to cover it. So I'm going to show you how we're looking. So you can see it's still bubbling away and it's nice and thick. So this is the perfect time to put our dumpling mixture on top. So let's do that. Okay, so we've got our dumpling mixture here, and we're gonna drop it in bunches on the top, just on the top, not touching. Go. Scrunty dumpling there, that's okay. Okay, so now we're going to put the lid on and we'll check back in a few minutes. Okay, so our dumplings have had about 15 minutes on top of our stew at a really good kind of bubbling boil. Oh my gosh, that looks really delicious. Scrumptious. Scrumptious is the word. That looks delicious. Okay, we are going to cut the heat on this and we're going to bowl it up and we're going to let you know how it tastes. Okay, January comfort food, eating your emotions during a pandemic. Now is the time for the taste test. So the beef is so tender you can cut it with a spoon. Ooh, and it's hot. Oh boy, that's good. Really good. It's nice and thick, it's nice and rich, it's piping hot, the dumplings are cooked all the way through, the beef is tender. It took all afternoon, but in the lockdown, what else you got time to do? So hope you've enjoyed this afternoon, and we will definitely be back with more Eating Your Emotions videos coming soon. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us.